Today's project is going to be a trailer brake control unit install on my wife's SUV. I had one of these on our last SUV and I sold it and I left it in it. The new owner probably didn't even want it. I should have took it out and kept it. But anyway, we bought a new SUV and because I like towing a heavy trailer and I use a brake controller. So let's talk about the vehicle first. Standing right behind me is my wife's SUV. This is a 2013 Lexus GX460. So that's what we're going to be doing it all, and I'm going to go into detail on how to do it. So the Lexus GX460 comes ready for a trailer brake controller, but it doesn't actually have one. So it's not that difficult, but I'll walk you through it. So actually this car didn't have a hitch on it when we bought it. So it was one of the first things I did is I had a hitch put on it. Just FYI, on one of these Lexus SUVs, the cost of the hitch is just a little bit less than the cost of the hitch installed at the Lexus dealer, which is pretty weird because it's a pretty big job to put on, because I did the last one on our last SUV, which was a 470. Anyway, it was like $575 or something like that, which isn't cheap, but you get a nice factory highly rated hitch. What I want to show you back here at the back of the car, so here's the hitch. Here's the hitch I got installed and everything. And this is already here. This comes with this, and this is actually better than the GX470 because it just had this connector, the round connector. And then when I towed my small trailer, which had a 4-pin trailer, I had to use an adapter. The 460 here has just a connector for each, which is nice because I've got one of each of these trailers. So I really like this feature. So the vehicle already has the connector, but it doesn't have the brake feature built in. So I also looked into getting, on our last car, I looked into getting a factory one, just thinking, hey, I'll buy a nice Lexus brake controller. Well, they don't make one. Pretty much you have to go get one in the aftermarket. So this is what I went with. You can buy whatever brake controller you like. I bought this one last time around, and I liked it. It had the features that I want. This one's made by a company called Tecontia, and it's called the Prodigy P2. So what was good about this one is it's pretty simple and doesn't have a lot of complexity to it, but it allows you to mount it in any orientation you want. And then it also it is a accelerometer sensing brake controller, so it's a more accurate brake controller. Okay, so also with this I got this thing, which is the harness for the vehicle. This is vehicle specific. Let's just open this thing up here. So this makes installation much easier because these harnesses are designed to plug straight into the vehicle, no cutting any wires or anything like that. So let's just take a look at this. I bought this exact one before, so I kind of knew that I wanted this one. You get a harness, but since we have the factory harness, you don't really need that. The actual brake controller itself, and some wire splices and instructions. So that's what you get. When I did this before, I used this bracket, so I'll probably do the same thing this time around, but we'll get in the car and figure out the best way to do it. Just want to show you a little bit on the inside of the car. First we're going to talk a little bit about where we're going to put it. Put it in the center console. It's my wife's SUV, and she doesn't really want a ugly brake controller, dangling right here below the steering wheel or anything. So instead of doing that, a lot of trucks, you can see these things dangling down here below the steering wheel. So instead of doing that, I'm going to put it in the center console. So this is the center console on a GX460, and where I'm going to put it is inside this compartment. This way, when this compartment is closed, you won't even know it's there. But the when you need it, you can open up the console and you can get to it. So right in here's cup holders. This is a little storage area in here. Put a little flashlight in here so you can see down in the center console. Down in here is where I'm going to mount it. I'm going to mount it, right here on the front. This is toward the front of the vehicle. This particular brake controller allows it to be mounted in a upright, vertical fashion, no problem. So I'm going to mount it something like that. I got my little flashlight here to light it up a little better. So I'm going to mount it something like that. That way you can get to the controls, you can get to the buttons. But then when my wife is driving the car most of the time and doesn't want to see it, she can just close that door and not see it. I did some research about how to take the center console out, just looking on YouTube, and you know what? I was kind of disappointed there wasn't a good tutorial. So we're going to wing it a little bit here, because we're going to need to run wires underneath this and everything to hide them. So one thing I know I've got to do. It's in the bottom of this. It's just this little mat just laying there, and there's a couple of bolts right there. So we'll definitely take those out, and then we'll see how loose it gets, and then we'll go from there. So I'm just going to show you down here. This is the driver's side footwell. You see the brake and the gas pedal right there. You don't really have to dismantle anything to be able to see that connector. It is right in here. See if I can get the camera where you can see it. It's that white connector hanging right there. That's dangling. See that one right in the center of the screen? That connector right there is it. That's the one you hook into. And I didn't even remove any panels under here. So it's accessible just the way it is. Now we may have to remove some stuff just to run the cables. But yeah, it's right there, and that is the connector we need to plug into. So all I'm going to do now, I checked these bolts and they're 10 millimeter. So I'm just going to take these out. So these two bolts look like this. So this thing definitely got real loose, but it looks like it's held in up front some. Okay, one thing I was pretty sure of is that this right here is just a snap-on trim piece. It's like a padded, soft piece. So I'm going to take that off. I'm going to use these plastic tools. I've got several of these. I bought in a kit. These things are great, and it's better to use these than a screwdriver because these won't tear anything up, Whenever you hear that little snap sound, you know you either separated one of those clips or you broke something. One or the other. I just wanted to come over to this side and put the light on this and show you what's going on. This is that padded trim piece that you just saw me snapping loose. And then what I kind of did, I had to reach down into here and just kind of get my fingers underneath it and pull up. So this piece pretty much pops loose like that. And I'm gonna have it completely out, just like that. So that's what that trim piece looks like. And it was right there, and if you take a look on the back of it, you can see there's just plastic clips everywhere that holds that on. A couple metal ones down here on the end, so in case you lose one of these or break them, that's what they look like, in case you need to go to the dealer and buy a new one. Half the time you take some of these trim pieces off, you break something when it comes to these little clips, and you got to go to the dealer and do the walk of shame into the parts department and ask for a replacement part for one of these clips. Okay, I was just gonna show you from this side as I pull off the other one here. Okay, I got both of those trim pieces off, and there's a couple of bolts on either side right here, right up toward the front. So I'm going to take those out, and then I'm pretty sure, just because I've done these before, that this shift knob will have to come off. So I'm going to take those two bolts out, and that shift knob I think will be the next step. these here have a 10mm hex, so you can use a socket, but they're actually more of a screw. Looks like the next thing to do is this middle piece here will need to come up. I wiggled on the whole center console, and she's not quite ready to go yet, so I gave a little tender movement here. Yeah, and this felt like it would come loose. I don't know if it's going to let me switch out of park. There we go. Okay, so all I did is I turned the engine on. I put the emergency brake on so I could shift it into neutral, because it looks like this thing ain't going to come out with the gear shift in the forward position like that. Okay, so we got lots of connectors down here. Okay. All right, so what we ended up with was a total of 4 electrical connectors, 3 that are harnessed together right here that are white, and 1 black one by itself. And that really opened this thing up. Let me show you what this looks like. So you can see with that piece gone, this whole thing is open, which is going to be good for running our wires and picking where we're going to put our connectors and stuff like that. Let's see if this whole thing wants to give now. Oh, okay. All right, I see what's up now. So take a look at this. We got a bolt here and over here. Those are 10mm bolts, kind of like the ones that were down in here, and they're holding it down to this metal bracket. So that's those, in case you want to see what those look like. But see, here's the thing. We're going to want to mount here, so we're going to want to drill and put screws and nuts, and I think I'm going to have to get this thing out, unfortunately. So let's see if we can figure out how to get this thing free without breaking anything. All right, there we go. So here was the secret. You raise this lid up, and then this back part needs to come out with this. So, whoops, just leave that lid down. So see, this is that area where you put your hand to lift that other thing. That's the trick of getting that up and out of there. And then there is a gray connector that looks like it plugs into the little cup holder piece, because there's a light in there. This center console is still attached right here. I just wanted to show that you can just kind of pop that loose. Like that, and that'll release this right here. And then we're going to do the same thing on the other side. This is the center piece here, center console piece. It comes into this side trim piece. That is also just popped together, and you can easily just pull that out like that. That'll release this completely. A quick point I want to make about this project. It's obvious by now that you could do this without removing that whole center console. And if you did it that way, you just leave a bunch of those screws in there. You'd, remember the 2 bolts we took out from inside there and the side of this middle piece? These 2 screws on either side up here, the 2 bolts in there. You can just leave all that together and do your drilling inside the car and mount and do whatever you wanted inside the car. Since I'm this far along, I'm going to go ahead and take the thing out and do the mount with it outside of the car. You do take this whole center console out. I'm in the back now, and what you got to do, there's a climate control panel right up here that is plugged in, so you do have to disconnect that thing. Once this is all loose, you see there's a white connector right here. That's actually that's the plug for the climate control. This little connector here has like a Christmas tree type push in to the inside of this, and it happens to be the connector in that's attached to the car, so it had to come out. Alright, center console completely out. So as you can see, it's just the bare underside of where the center console was. This connector here, seriously, I had to stand on my head in the back floorboard of the car to get this thing out. What's going on with this is this little clip here. See that little thing right there? I'm touching my thumb. That snapped into the inside of the center console. So even after I unplugged it from the climate control panel, it wouldn't come out until that thing was snapped loose. Alright, so here it is. Center console. It's quite large actually, sitting on the bench. I'm just going to show you some of the inside. I want to say where that thing was snapped in. Oh, would have been on this side. Right there is that hole where that wire harness was snapped in. So when we put this back together, I'll snap that wire harness back in there. Actually, I may not. It's such a pain in the butt. And then this was the connector I disconnected that runs the climate control panel, which is right here. Hey, I kind of want to briefly show you how I mark the holes. This can be done a bunch of different ways, obviously. I put a piece of painter tape at about the depth. I mean, the first thing I did is I held in the brake controller, and I put it kind of to the height that I thought felt right, and then I measured down with a tape measure and found that it was about 3 inches. So I stuck a piece of tape in there. It's real hard to work down in there because, you know, you're down in this compartment. So I just cut a little piece of cardboard from the box of this thing with exactly 3 inches to these red lines and folded it and kind of just set it right there. And that's how I made that horizontal Sharpie mark. That way it's very good and horizontal. And then I just made a measurement between the holes, and they're actually slots in the brake controller mount, so those can be off a little bit and you can always adjust them. And I marked a center, and then I measured out and marked where the 2 holes need to be drilled to mount the thing. What I'm going to use, what I'm going to show you here that I'm going to use, this is just a right angle drill attachment that lets you get into tight spaces. They also make right angle drills, but I just have this little attachment that has a gearbox, and that's what I'm going to use for this. So I'm just going to get in here and get myself situated right on my marked holes. It didn't make it. I just had some screws. These are some nuts and bolts that I had. They're actually kind of nice stainless steel fasteners I happen to have somewhere here in my garage. And I got some washers. So I'm going to go ahead and just get this bracket mounted. You can see the two mounts, the screws that are mounting the bracket. So what I did is I put the brake controller in there. I kind of determined where about the hole needed to be, just approximately for the wire harness. And I made a Sharpie mark on the outside because this drill bit was too big to get into my right angle tool anyways. Okay, so if you recall, this is the generic harness that came with the brake controller, which just has the plug that plugs in the brake controller and then just wire ends. And this is the harness that came with the brake controller that has the adapter to fit it directly into the car. Well, I don't know if you can tell by looking at this, but I held it up in the car and this thing isn't even close to being long enough because I'm putting the brake controller way over there in the center console. So what I'm going to do, since I have both of these, I'm just going to cut this one here at this thing because I have that connector over here. And then I'm just going to splice the wires together in the middle, and that will give me the length I need to reach from the driver's side footwell near the emergency brake all the way over to the center console. That hole is just barely big enough. It does fit, just not a lot of extra. So there's not enough room to get a screwdriver in here on the side. So what I've got, I'll show you here, is just I've got a ratchet with a 1/4 inch socket and then just a little short Phillips bit. So that's what I'm going to use to get in here and give these things a little tighten. Remember how I said earlier that I had two harnesses and between the two they'd be long enough? No, they're not. They are not quite long enough to reach once I ran it all through there. So all I'm going to do now is I've got some wire that I had. I'm going to splice an extension onto this wire and then run it. And I'll do the final splice there in the center console. So two of these wires were 12 gauge and two were 18 gauge. So I had some 18 gauge and some 12 gauge. The 12 gauge I had was only black, so none of these colors are going to match or whatever, but I'll trace them and make sure I hook up the right one when I do the final splice. Okay, I've put the center console back in the car. Here's our brake controller in place and everything. Here's the harness coming out of there. I've cut it to length. I've pulled the other harness through here across the dash and over to the point where it plugs in there. So we're going to splice these together. The other thing we've got to do is we've got to hook up a ground wire. This was built into one of the harnesses, but when I cut them apart it came out. So we've got to find a screw, a bolt or something on the frame to hook this up. But one of the things I've done is I went ahead and installed these two screws here that held it at the front. I've started in the 4 bolts, the 2 that are down here in that opening, and then there's 2 right here. I've started those in. I just got to run those down. I have not plugged the harness into the connector up there for the into the vehicle yet because you know, I want to get this in completely hooked up first. Okay, I mentioned I was going to have to use some different color wires. I wrote down which wires were going to be what, so I knew ahead of time what I was going to need to connect to what, so that is done. I've already spliced the white wire, and this extra white wire goes down to that a ring terminal that's on a ground screw. I'm using these little crimp connectors now. So next we're going to do this this red wire from the brake controller. Whenever I do one of these crimps, I always tug on them and make sure they make good connection. Okay, so I plugged that connector in under the dash down there, and these little status lights lit up, which they're supposed to. And just as another check, I hit the manual brake button, which manually engages the trailer brakes, and the vehicle tail lights lit up. The brake lights on the vehicle lit up, which is a good sign. Here's the splices that I made here. Just want to point out right down there is where I grounded that white wire. So all I'm going to do now is I'm going to zip tie some of those wires up so they're kind of nice and tucked away. So I got all the center console back together. I didn't make video of me snapping those parts back together and putting all that back together and plugging in those harnesses. You saw me take it all apart earlier in the video, so really you just put back together whatever you took apart earlier. Everything went together fine. No broken tabs or anything. So now that the brake controller is hooked up, I just wanted to demonstrate how it works. So I'm going to plug the connector in right there at the back. I'm cruising along right now at about 55. I'm about to slow down to make a turn, so as I start to brake, this thing will detect that I'm braking and will detect the amount of acceleration. There, I'm braking kind of hard now. I'll let off. Now I'm going to brake pretty hard here for this turn. So, as you saw there, as I needed to stop, okay, I'm at a complete stop now. As you saw, when I went to come to that stop, it braked a little bit as I was pressing, but its accelerometer told it that I didn't need to brake real hard, and then as I pressed the pedal harder, it increased the braking gain. A couple final thoughts on setting the gain on your brake controller. Everybody's brake controller is not going to be the same. Follow your manufacturer's instructions. What I did is I just set it to where at full braking power with the manual lever on, it caused the trailer brakes to lock the wheels up while driving about 5 miles an hour on my gravel driveway. It was an easy way to tell it's gravel. You can just hear it. You can just ease the vehicle real slow and listen, and you could hear the gravel start to make noise when the tires locked up. That ended up being about 6 on my unit. Just real quick, the way those things work, they just send a voltage signal to the trailer from 0 to 12 volts, and that voltage signal proportionally applies the brakes on your trailer, and then your trailer will have an adjustment. So I've never adjusted mine, but they say periodically you do have to adjust the trailer brakes so that they will engage properly, because as they wear, they don't self-adjust. So just a few comments there. Hope you enjoyed watching my video. Thanks for watching as usual, and I'll see you next time.